one to the left. Williams keeps it, works it, cuts inside. Williams is free. He dives into the end zone for the scooper touchdown.
21-yard touchdown run for quarterback Carter Williams.
And the Scoopers take the lead, 16-10. Bowman comes out of the shotgun. It is second down and long, second down and 10. He takes a snap. He's going to get chased out of the pocket. He's going to throw. Is it caught? Waiting for a signal.
Touchdown!
It is caught for Aberdeen Central. It's a score.
Colby Dowen.
How about that? Colby Dowen hauls it in.
16-yard touchdown pass.
Unbelievable. All right, here we go.
Direct snap to Dowen.
Yep, Dowen's in the backfield. Dowen takes it. Trying to work it left side. He's got some room.
He's in.
Dowen crosses it. Aberdeen Central takes the 1-point lead with 1 second left. Wow.
He has been unstoppable.
He sure has.
This second half through the air and on the ground. Scooper fans are stunned.
So here we go. Out of the shotgun goes Eisman. He's got 2 wide receivers. Split out. Easton's going to come to this side. Jackson back to pass. Going to throw it over the middle. It's going to be caught. It's going to be gone. He's going to the 5, the 10. Touchdown, Tigers! Is that Schmeichel? Tyler Schmeichel? Wyatt Ziegler. Was the ball tipped or what? How can your center catch the football? Was it tipped or what, Tough? Ziegler. All right. Big man balling. You gotta love that. Gotta love that.
Welcome, everybody. It's another fantastic Wednesday evening, and that means it's time for another episode of Inside the 605, covering everything South Dakota high school football. That is Jandy Man Jason Andera. I'm David Brown. Remember, you can ask Jandy anything. We are live on YouTube, Live Ticket TV, 605 Sports. Comment at any time during our show. We will answer some questions at the end. Lots to go over. It's October. The playoffs are getting closer, and not only are we going to go over teams, we're going to take a closer look at a bunch of different teams and storylines in all 7 classes.
A closer look kind of is going to look at some teams that we talk about a ton of teams on the show on a week-to-week basis, but there's some that we've overlooked just a little bit. I want to make sure we talk about some of these closer look teams. And also, I have to say out there, thank you for watching.
Yes, we appreciate
the numbers
it.
continue to go up, and tell your friends, now that it's almost playoff time, to get them in the habit of watching every Wednesday night, because it helps us out.
Absolutely. And if you don't catch us live, hey, it's on YouTube. You can watch the replay anytime. We get these out well before the Friday and Saturday games. So it's a lot of fun. I've been having fun. We're spreading the love to all these teams, trying to cover as much of South Dakota high school football as we can. So without further ado, brownie points.
Let's dish out the brownie points.
Let's dish out the brownie points. We always start with something sweet here. Got to start this week with West Central. 41 unanswered points in an absolute thrashing of Canton at 48-14. Now, remember, there was the debate about whether Canton or Sioux Falls Christian was the number 1 team in 11A for a while. Sioux Falls Christian, they blew out Canton the previous week. And then I don't know if there was just some residual effect for that for the Seahawks, but West Central took full advantage, especially on the ground.
They did, and that's what they've been doing all year, is taking advantage on the ground. But you look at what they've done this year. I mean, they're 3-2, but they've lost to Sioux Falls Christian
and Lennox.
And they got a game against Del Rapids, which we'll get into a little bit more. But that will be very interesting to see. Maybe West Central's the team that we weren't talking about that belongs at the top of 11A.
This is the midway point, essentially, of the regular season. You know as well as anyone covering schools for this long, a midseason win and a win of this fashion over a team in Canton that was number one to start the season can do wonders for your confidence. And as you said, the Trojans' only 2 losses are to the current top 2 teams in the class.
Yeah, I think this is a huge turning point for both of those teams, Del Rapids and West Central, but especially West Central, because they've been kind of overlooked most of this season. This is their chance to really get on the map. But yes, brownie points are deserved for the win over Canton.
We will see if they can carry that over. We mentioned their only 2 losses are to the top 2 teams, and they're going to face the number 3 and 4 teams currently, Del Rapids and Dakota Valley, in the next 2 weeks. We're going to find out a lot about West Central here come, let's see, today's the 2nd. Come October 16th, we're going to know a lot more about West Central.
Yeah, I think they're pretty good. Like I said, we're going to get more into them when we get into the Wheel of Justice into 11A, but it's really interesting how they divvy up the carries on that team and really dominate with their offensive line. We'll talk more about that.
Yeah, 4 different Trojans had rushing touchdowns in that victory over Canton. And speaking of the ground game, second brownie point, how about Faulkton area? You know, they had a couple losses earlier this season to some classes above them. You know, this is a team that's coming off a 9B championship appearance where they lost to Avon. Ranked matchup this week against Sully Buttes, a 28-8 victory, and their ground game really produced.
Yeah, their ground game is working really well right now, and like you said, their losses coming to 2 undefeated teams, so you can't scratch them too much. And then in 9B, where it's pretty open, other than Avon we've been talking about, Faulkton could be that next team. So a huge shout out to them, what they were able to do. And I watched most of that game against Sully Buttes. They pretty much had a cushion throughout the game.
Yep.
They felt like the better team against another ranked team. That's a great sign for the Trojans.
28-8 final. So not only was the ground game good, the defense was solid. Just a good bounce back for Faulkton in that Class 9B race. And the rest of the regular season, pretty favorable schedule for them to get momentum heading into the playoffs.
Get momentum, get healthy. They've got some guys who can run. Tristan Balloon has been awesome this year. I can't wait to see if they're playing their best ball here in about a month.
Tristan Balloon, Landon Coyle combined for 221 of Faulkton's 294 yards on the ground. Pretty impressive for Faulkton. Final brownie point, we're just going to go general. It's October. Now, for most people, that's postseason baseball. For us, we are getting into the nitty-gritty of the regular season. Positioning matters. There are much more consequential games. And, in fact, in all 4 11-man classes, we have ranked teams facing each other this weekend.
Which is much different than last week, right?
Yes.
Last week we were struggling.
We were struggling for matchups.
To find great matchups. We had plenty to talk about, but struggling for great matchups. Now it's October. I think every week we kind of know. We learned over the first month or so which teams to watch out for, and now we know. And, you know, while you're giving props to October, is that the best sports month of the year?
Oh my goodness,
it could be.
It's close.
I mean, NBA getting started.
You got NBA and NHL starting, postseason baseball, football, obviously NFL, college, high school. It might be March, maybe the only other month that rivals it, but October's pretty darn good.
I personally give me October every day.
Absolutely, got all 4 major sports going on, and of course all the great high school football going on here in South Dakota. Speaking of which, another excellent week for some top performers. You had a lot to choose from. Tough choice for game ball this week, but of course we're going to go over all the great performers.
Yeah, I split them up into 11 and 9-man again, and this week a lot more 11-man players to choose from, and the one who's going to start this out is Landon Delaney, the future SDSU wide receiver. Big game for him, 5 catches, 97 yards from a backup quarterback, and then he ran a touchdown in as well as having a total of 2 touchdowns through the air. Huge game for Delaney. He's had a huge season, by the way, and he makes his quarterbacks better. Then Sam Knuth out of Harrisburg's quietly having an awesome season. The guy, his completion percentage is way up. He's thrown 10 touchdowns and only 1 interception, and he had half of those touchdowns last week against Rapid City Stevens. And one of the fastest guys, regardless of position, in high school football. He just happens to play quarterback for a big school, but he did get another rushing touchdown along with his 57 yards rushing. So big week for Knuth.
Absolutely. And like you said, kind of under the radar just because, you know, the Knuth name. His older brother Jacob obviously did some great things at Harrisburg. Sam, the future St. Thomas Tommy, kind of quietly. Harrisburg hasn't really not necessarily like ruffled any feathers or shown any real weaknesses. They're kind of just doing what they need to do right now, which I know for them is just fine. Wait till we get to the playoffs.
That's great news for them. And I've got Sam on there, but Braden Fieldy had another awesome day as well. You could put him and Josiah Hines on almost every week
Pretty
as well.
much.
So we'll give the tip of the cap to Sam this week. Let's go back to that list now, and we'll take a look at Donovan Rose. So Donovan Rose missed 2 games before this week due to a broken finger, and he came back with a vengeance, Dave.
That he did.
255 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, returned a kick for a touchdown. Also had a big day on the defensive side. I'd say he maybe had some pent-up energy, Dave.
I would think missing a couple games, you want to get back out there and you want to hit someone that's not your own teammate and also just be in game action. A big win for Sioux Valley over Dual.
Over Dual, exactly. A team that's caused some teams problems this year. No problem for the Sioux Valley Cossacks. How about Ethan Swenson? They had an injury to their main running back, Davion Simonson. He came up and said, give me the ball. Let's find a way to get this thing done through the air. Spread the ball all over the field. 19 of 25. That's what I really liked from Ethan. He was in control this whole game. 290 yards, a couple of long touchdowns, and he really guided this team, especially in the second half as he stepped on the gas for Jefferson against O'Gorman.
Yep, 34-14 was your final. Jefferson, we mentioned them along with Brandon, Harrisburg, Lincoln. They're kind of the 4 that have separated themselves in 11 AAA. But Jefferson, with that one loss, kind of the 4th of those 4. We'll see if performances like this maybe give them a little bit of momentum. I mean, none of these teams are going to probably stay undefeated. One might, but they're all going to face each other here down the stretch.
Yeah, and Jefferson could give a loss to one of those top 3 teams. We'll talk about that just a bit when we get to 11 AAA, but big game for Ethan. And then Bergen Tetzlaff out of Brookings. He's been on this list several times, but Brookings keeps their stats with huddles, so that means they actually go back, review the tackles. 25 tackles,
That's
Dave.
Unreal.
2 sacks and a couple of tackles for loss. He's been unbelievable on the defensive side this year, but what does he do on the offensive side? Also, 4 catches, 79 yards, a touchdown, and he ran a touchdown in. So a team that doesn't put up many points came to an 11 AAA team, didn't get the win, but it wasn't because of how Tetzlaff played.
No, it was a close game, 26-21. Brookings does end up losing to Sioux Falls Roosevelt in that AA versus AAA matchup. So the Bobcats no longer undefeated, but certainly a good showing by Tetzlaff and the Bobcats.
Huge week. Let's go to the 9-man game changers. Cameron Eng of Castlewood. He loaded up 7 carries, 6 of them went for touchdowns, and he also had a punt return for a touchdown. And they played Oldham Ramona Rutland, which, you know, they were undefeated. I mean, they're a good team coming in. They absolutely crushed them in that game. So big shout out to Cameron Eng on that one. As we continue on that list, Gannon Henrik, of DeSmet ran for 222 yards and ran it in for 3 touchdowns. A big win for them as DeSmet keeps rolling. Ty Landmark of Dubrook, he got his team their first win of the year, and they've struggled. So for him to come out with a 3-touchdown game, that's a lot. A 44-6 win over Waverly South Shore. Give him a lot of credit in that one. And then Riley Veal with his weekly appearance on this list.
I was going to say, you don't have to change that graphic much week to week.
Yeah, we just keep using the same picture. Thank you for the picture, by the way, Matt Gade. That's a beautiful one. But he came up with 26 carries, 287, and 5 touchdowns. And, of course, does it on both sides of the ball in a big win over Timberlake. 2 sacks for the man.
44-12, Riley Veal, Hardin County Bison once again remain with just 1 loss on the season. A firm contender in Class 9A. But when it's all said and done, who gets the game 1 game ball?
So one of the ingredients to being on the game 1 game ball winner, is playing a tough team. And that's what Boston Catzer did. 17 of 20. Not quite the Jared Goff performance that we saw
Pretty
the
close,
other night,
though.
but dang near perfect. 17 of 20, 304 yards. He spread the ball out to 3 different receivers for touchdowns. He also fed Tate Gertis for a 48 yards of receiving in the night. And then he ran for 64 yards, and he does it on the defensive side too. And you do that against a ranked team, that gets you the honor, folks. Boston Catzers had a phenomenal year, but what he did last Friday night against Dakota Valley shows why he is a college quarterback.
It is a 48-19 victory for Lennox over Dakota Valley, number 2 over number 4 in Class 11A. And as we kind of alluded to, and you made mention at the very first episode of the season, you like Sioux Falls Christian and you like Lennox, and through the midway point, they are proving you correct.
So far, so good for both those two teams, and they still have a couple of tests left, especially Lennox. They've got some games that they have to grind out, and they We'll see what happens when the weather gets cold. If Boston Catcher can throw for 300 yards, I think he can. But we're going to have to prove it on the field, and that'll be the big question for Lennox.
Well, even in playoff defeats in years past, we've seen Katzer in bad weather, whether it's rain or snow. We've seen him be effective in the postseason no matter what, even if it doesn't always end up in a win for Lennox.
Yeah, they struggled. The game they got eliminated last year, they had one of those ups and downs, but they're a lot closer to being consistent on their ups this year. And he's got several receivers. Last year, of course, Porter Enan was his featured receiver. This year, 3 different guys going for touchdowns. Tate Gertis having a phenomenal year. The line being able to play with some of the biggest lines in the class. Really like this Lennox team.
Boston Catzer is your game ball winner this week, sponsored by Game One. We'll be right back after this message from our friends at Game One. Thanks again to our friends at Game One for sponsoring the Game Ball winner. It's Boston Catzer this week. Time, as always, for The Real Deal, your weekly interview with 605 Sports' Ryan Deal, covering all the big topics in 11 and 9-man, and bringing up some names from the past as well.
And he shares a little bit with Karst Tunner. You might remember him from Miller. He'll talk about a story that he's working on with him. But as always, talking about some of the biggest games, 9-man and 11-man. Here's our conversation.
Time for my weekly visit with Ryan Deal at 605 Sports. Always a lot going on with you, Ryan. How are you doing today?
Doing good. Yeah, about over halfway through the season. It's going to start getting fun here. We just flipped the calendar to October, so we know weather's going to get a little bit chillier. But obviously, that means the action's really going to pick up once we get closer to the postseason and everything.
Well, you mentioned that the action's picking up. In one class, the action is definitely starting to pick up. Is 11 AAA. I know you haven't talked about 11 AAA a lot, but we've got a battle of unbeatens tonight or Friday night.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we were talking, these top teams in 11 AAA just have not faced each other yet. It was a matter of time before they were going to start facing off in the regular season, and it's going to be a fun one here with Brandon Valley and Sioux Falls Lincoln. I believe that's 2 against 3. So obviously a couple top 5 teams, one that's really going to be highly anticipated for the people that really follow the 11 AAA ranks and everything. And that'll just be obviously a great test for both those teams to see where they stack up, because obviously both undefeated, both playing well, and you knew it was going to happen at some point where they faced off. So that will obviously be a one to keep an eye on.
That's one I hope to get my eyes on Friday night for sure. Let's talk about 9-man football. We've got a battle of unbeatens. Avon has not been tested very closely so far this year. They get a test as they go to play Trip Delmont Armor and East Central Dakota Christian. A battle of unbeatens. This could be an interesting game.
I think so. Another good test really for both of these teams. We've talked several times throughout the year about Avon. I'm sure some people are maybe getting tired of us talking about Avon so much, but they're just the kind of the cream of the crop in 9-man football, especially in 9B. They're really rolling right along, and obviously facing Trip Delmont Armor and East Central Dakota Christian up next, and hopefully that'll be a good one, a good test for both teams. We're hoping and everything, but Avon's just chugging along right now. But the Nighthawks, you got to give those guys credit. Undefeated right now, and they're playing well. I don't think a lot of people really anticipated them to be at this point that they are at this point of the season. So certainly a good test for those guys to face off against Avon.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. A 9B power against a 9AA team, that always adds some interest to 9-man football. But speaking of 9-man football, right now, I believe we're sitting at 11 teams as we enter October who are still unbeaten. How long do you think some of these teams can stay unbeaten? There's going to be some good games coming up, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting to see these number of undefeated teams at this point of the season without losses. But there are definitely some games coming up. Undefeated team facing an undefeated team. Some teams, from 9AA might be facing a team from 9A. We can certainly talk about some of those whenever we get to that point of the season. But there's definitely some matchups coming up that'll definitely kind of help maybe shape some of these classes once we get closer to postseason and once the positioning comes into place for the seedings and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of undefeated teams at this point. So that's certainly going to be fun to see how it shakes out once we get to some of those matchups later on in the season.
We're kind of looking ahead at the schedule of some of these undefeated teams. Which team do you think maybe has the easiest path to get to an undefeated regular season?
I think the one for sure would probably be Wall. I think that they've kind of gotten past the tougher part of their schedule. You know, they face Phillip right away to start the season, and that's always a highly anticipated matchup for those two towns and programs and everything. You know, a lot of history and tradition in that one. So they got past that one with an easy win, and I just think their schedule sets up nicely for those guys to more than likely finish undefeated during the regular season. Obviously, then they'll take advantage of that, and it will be a high seed. 1, 2. I got to imagine. So a lot of teams are going to have to go out to Wall to play on that beautiful turf field they got out there. So I definitely think Wall was probably the easiest path to an undefeated regular season.
Good stuff. Always putting out good stuff on 605sports.com. And this week, planning a little story on a former high school football player. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, absolutely. Carson Hunter, former Miller, Highmore Herald, all-state football player, had an interesting college football journey. Started at South Dakota State, played for the Jacks for a couple of years, and went to Colorado Mesa Division II school, and really shined out there. Was, I believe, like an RMAC Freshman of the Year or something like that in the postseason awards, and then now he's out at Indiana University of Pennsylvania Division II school. Really a high level program and conference out there that he's a part of, and so talk to him, and we'll have a story featured about Karst later on this week. And it was pretty cool. I did ask him what's it been like for him to watch the Jacks win a couple national championships, because obviously he was a part of that kind of when the Jacks really started to kind of make their way up the ranks, so FCS, and it was really cool. He said he loved it. He no ill will towards those guys. He said he loved it. Loves seeing his former teammates win that kind of stuff, and keeps in touch with a lot of those guys and everything. So it's easy to write a story about Karst Hunter because he's got a lot going for him, and he still has, obviously keeps tabs on everybody in South Dakota and the Jacks. So really cool to hear that kind of stuff from Karst.
Can't wait to see that come out on 605 Sports. Once again, great to talk to you, Ryan.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you later, Jason.
Thanks, as always, to Mr. Deal. And how about a name from the past, Mr. Karst Hunter? I almost said Karst Miller because he obviously played at Miller, but he's had quite the interesting collegiate career.
He has. Going to SDSU, I had high hopes for him, and he's really proven what he can do now that he's been able to get on the field. But I remember watching him like as a junior, for instance, and Miller Highmore Herald hadn't thrown the ball much before that. He was out there and he commanded the field. So he was an excellent high school quarterback. Fun to see that he's continuing to have success. What has it been, like 8 years?
Well, with the COVID year, it like throws everything off. Like there are guys in college I swear have been around for 7 years.
He's enjoying,
and they're not called doctors like in Tommy Boy, but there are a lot of guys
who
who
enjoying
have
it.
And
I used to love watching him play. So keep it up.
Absolutely. You know what I love? The Wheel of Justice, because it is fair, it is equitable. It may not be so equitable. It kind of leans a certain way sometimes.
When it's flat, it is super equitable.
All right.
When it's
here
on a slant,
all right, so we can't start on 9. We got to start it at the question mark, and I'll hold it here, and then I believe it's my turn to spin. Actually, no, that was a terrible spin. I gotta do it again. There we go. Live television, folks. Triple A. Look at that.
What a shocker.
What a shocker. All right, we'll just go 11 triple A on down. Harrisburg over Stevens, 49-0. Brandon Valley over Rapid City Central, 49-0. There's been so many duplicate scores in 11 AAA this year. I mentioned it. I can't remember what it was a couple weeks ago, but 3 different games ended with the same scores.
45-7 or something.
Something like that. Lincoln over Washington. Jefferson over O'Gorman was the big one. You mentioned a little earlier. Davion Simonson was out. San Lucius stepped up at that running back position along with Swenson under center.
Yeah, he had some big runs in that game against O'Gorman. He really established the running game for Ethan Swenson, and then Ethan Swenson took it from there, distributing it to Ed Whiting and to Unzen and all the guys that they have on the outside. So loved what I saw from Jefferson last week. O'Gorman, it's got a little bit of work to do.
Yep.
But those top 3 teams just continue to roll.
Absolutely, yeah. Neither of them were really contests. The closest one among the top 3 was Lincoln over Washington, but again, 47-28. Kind of proving again, we said the top 4 have separated themselves. I know Jefferson will probably be able to possibly snatch one of those victories against the top 3, but for right now, the top 3 have separated themselves.
For sure they have, and those top 3 teams are closer look this week. They are all undefeated teams, and they really obviously haven't played each other yet. So what is the difference between these teams? So when I look at Brandon Valley and I look at Lincoln, they're teams that are trying to do it with underclassmen quarterbacks. Brandon Valley's had injuries at quarterback. Lincoln's had some real success at quarterback with Brody Schaefer doing a great job. But Harrisburg's the one team to me that has that veteran quarterback, a senior 2-year starter in Sam Knuth. I think that gives them a small advantage. But defensively, I look at Brandon Valley, and I think they maybe have the advantage. And then dynamically, I just love what Lincoln has on their offense. They've been the highest scoring team so far this year with 45.2 points per game, and they've really had the toughest schedule of the 3 teams. But when you cross compare all those scores, it's kind of a wash, really.
It's kind of a hodgepodge, like you said, because Brandon Valley and Harrisburg each have 2 shutouts. Brandon Valley, as you said, has kind of the best overall defense, or has at least shown the best overall defense. Even with as good as Brody Schaefer has been, Harrisburg probably has the best quarterback situation overall just because of the veteran presence of Sam Knuth. But then again, Lincoln is scoring a bunch, and you saw on the screen there the upcoming game. So the big game this week is obviously Brandon against Lincoln. Then Harrisburg is at Brandon on October 18th, and then we end the season with Lincoln and Harrisburg on October 24th.
Yeah, so week after week, I think 3 of the next 4 weeks, we're going to have one of those undefeateds going against each other. Right now, at least, they're undefeated. But the next one coming up, Friday night, Brandon Valley against Lincoln. This one, it could be really good because this is the best offensive team in my book against the best defensive team in my book. And will Lincoln be able to move the ball? Last couple of weeks, Lincoln struggled a little bit on defense. I mean, it's hard to call it struggling, but they did let Washington get ahead early in that game last week. They did give up some points that they aren't normally accustomed to giving up, so they're going to really have to tighten up if they want to stop Landon Delaney, Levi Veskerna, and the rest of those weapons on the offensive side for Brandon Valley. Although Brandon Valley's not 100% back there, so that kind of evens things out for me a little bit too. I tell you what, all these teams have their opportunity laid out right in front of them to show what they can do in October.
And it's such an interesting contrast, as you pointed out, just the individual matchups. Besides, obviously, the best offense in Lincoln against the best defense in Brandon Valley, you think about the individual playmakers. Brody Schaefer, a couple weeks ago, probably had his first off week of the season, but then the running game for Lincoln really took off. Can Brandon Valley stop the Lincoln running game? And then vice versa. Can Brandon Valley's offense be consistent? We don't know necessarily the full intricacies of the quarterback situation. We know Delaney can take the top off of defense. We know those running backs are good. I think it's just fascinating individual one-on-one matchups.
Tons of matchups like that to look at. And, you've got college players on both sides of the ball for both teams. So a lot of talent on the field, and it's just going to come down to who's not making mistakes. So this week, so far Lincoln's done pretty well without making mistakes offensively, made a few mistakes defensively, so we'll see which team has the advantage there. But going back to Harrisburg, when you take the common opponents that those 3 teams have played against this year, Harrisburg has the best score against those common opponents of Rapid City, Stevens, Central, and O'Gorman, or Washington, Stevens and O'Gorman. They've only given up 7 points, and Harrisburg might end up having the best defense out of this group. They've been pretty dang good on defense as well, and they're obviously really consistent offensively too. So just because we're saying best offense, best defense, I mean, Harrisburg
this is in a vacuum. This is right now.
They might complain. They might get both of those titles before the end of the season.
The other matchups just to watch in AAA, Sioux Falls, Roosevelt, and Harrisburg. Stevens is at Jefferson. And then as we move on down to AA, O'Gorman is going to face Pierre. So while we're on that, let's move down to 11 AA. And we've talked about the parity in this class over the past couple of weeks. We'll get a closer look at them in a second, but just a quick comment on Pierre losing its 3rd straight game, and they have fallen out of the top 5. I never imagined that would happen, honestly, ever, if I'm being completely honest.
Well, after they lost their first game this year, you asked me who had the most confidence, and I still said Pierre, because I watched their games, and they were still, they've got talent on that team, but they are young. So we're going to see how those young players can bounce back after 3 straight losses. That's huge to not see Pierre in the top 5. But who do you take out of this list right here in the top 5? And you and I both talked about this. Both of us could not put Pierre in the top 5 right now.
I think, well, my top 5 is exactly what the media poll ended up being in that specific order. Again, we're going to get a closer look. That's going to be your closer look in 11 AA. Is that Pierre?
I've got one thing different on there. I put Yankton number 2 and Brookings number 3, just because Brookings still has to play some of those teams at the top with Watertown and Yankton, and I just look at the two teams and I just think Yankton might be undersold just a hair.
Well, number 1, Watertown, staying consistent. They've been honestly the only consistent thing right now. Right. Well, them and Brookings, because Brookings lost obviously last week to Sioux Falls Roosevelt, was a AAA team, but Watertown took care of business against Douglas 54-0. We mentioned Brookings, tough game. They do end up losing to Sioux Falls Roosevelt, but just by 5, 26-21. You mentioned the great game that Tetzlaff had. And then obviously the big one, Yankton over Pierre, number 4 over then number 3 Pierre, 35-7. What'd you take away from that contest specifically?
Well, 2 things. It showed me that I think Yankton is the second best team in that class right now. They played really well during that game. And Pierre didn't have any fight back after the turnovers. And that's been an issue for Pierre now for the last 3 weeks in a row, is turning the ball over against these good teams at inopportune times. Yankton played well on the road, and they played Harrisburg pretty well in the first quarter of that game.
Yep.
So I think the Bucks is a legitimate loss. That's the first time Pierre has really taken it in the teeth this year. So that's like I said, going to be a key. How do they bounce back after that? But I also say Bucks are pretty good.
T area, who was receiving votes, moved up to number 4 after a 54-0 shutout over Mitchell. Spearfish goes to number 5, and they barely scrape by Huron 14-7. And Spearfish has been a great story, especially to start the season after that win over T. Now I wouldn't say they're struggling, but I think a bit of reality is setting in that they really need to play consistent football.
Yeah, and we talked about the team speed. Yes, they have that. We talked about the skill players. Definitely. The depth is getting them a little bit. They need to continue to be strong throughout the regular season in AA. You're going to get beat up. We'll see how they get it back up off the mat after getting beat up the last couple of weeks, even though they're still 1-1 in those 2 weeks.
And then probably one of the funner games, Aberdeen Central with a last-second win over Sturgis, get a touchdown late, go for 2, and get the win 18-17 over a scrappy Scooper team.
I think it tells you Sturgis maybe belongs in this conversation as well with those mid-level teams. They had command of this game and had a chance to really take a 2-score lead, weren't able to do that. And then Aberdeen Central comes back and they had a chance to take a lead. They turned the ball over. So both teams had some chances. And then the last couple minutes of the game, Sturgis takes the lead with 2.5 minutes left in the game. And I thought, okay, they've got this one. But Aberdeen, struggling on offense all night long, comes down the field and scores, goes for 2, and gets the 1-point victory.
18-17 is your final. So, yeah, maybe Sturgis is the 8th out of the 11 teams that might possibly
It's going to make the playoffs so fun.
Oh, man, it's going to make the playoffs absolutely amazing. But, again, we're not trying to, bury Pierre or call them or make this like a post-mortem type thing. But we do want to take a closer look at the Governors because it's just honestly surprising. They're the 7-time defending champions. They've established one of the greatest dynasties in South Dakota high school football history, frankly. So why this year specifically are they struggling?
So let's break it down. This is a team that has had trouble completing passes consistently. So when they get in those passing situations, because they're getting 3.4 yards per carry on the run and they're getting into these 3rd and longs or these third down situations, they're not able to continue drives, passing it or running the football. So offensively, consistency has definitely been an issue for them. But they also are the youngest team that they've had in a long time, David. The fewest seniors they've had on the team since 2018. Only 14 seniors on this team. Their 2 leading receivers are both sophomores this year. And I think that's something we haven't seen from Pierre in a long time. They've had senior leaders year in, year out over this stretch of 7 wins in a row. So I think that's part of it. And then the other part we got to keep in mind, the last 3 weeks, they played the 3 best teams in the class.
They have.
I mean, you get beat up week after week. You got Watertown, you played Brookings, and now you play Yankton. And those are tough to go back to back with. They need to get back on their feet. And, of course, this week now they played their AAA game against O'Gorman, so it doesn't necessarily get easier for Pierre. But those are some observations on why Pierre isn't the same team they have been in the last couple of years.
And you mentioned it a little bit earlier, the turnovers. Like, as cliche as turnovers are for being a detriment to your team's performance, they've just piled up for Pierre here recently.
Starting the year out, Caleb Lounsbury at quarterback, he took care of the ball pretty well in their wins. But again, he gets forced into these passing situations, and he threw the 2 pick sixes against Brookings that killed him.
Yep.
And he had 5 other turnovers in those 2 games against Watertown and Yankton combined. So, yeah, they got to take care of the ball if they want any chance to play with these teams.
And as you mentioned, their big game this week, it's a home contest, and it's their AAA contest against O'Gorman, an O'Gorman team that's 1-4 right now, Pierre 2-3. I'm very intrigued by that matchup.
I tell you what, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be in Pierre. So
also homecoming for Jason Poppinga.
And homecoming for Jason Poppinga. That's right. He won a title back with Pierre before the Steve Steele dynasty started. So with Alex Gray and company. But O'Gorman needs a win desperately too. Both these teams desperately need a win, and it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be pretty even as far as like school size. These are very similar size schools, similar size teams. Both have very few seniors on their teams. O'Gorman has even fewer than Pierre does, but I still think O'Gorman's probably the better team in this. We'll see if Pierre can bounce back.
Sturgis is playing Yankton, the number 3 team right now, and then the other 4 teams in the top 5 are all playing each other. We really have some excellent matchups in AA this week. Number 5 Spearfish is at number 1 Watertown. We'll see if the Arrows can keep the pedal on the gas. And for Spearfish, this is going to be a good test because they're 4-1, but as I mentioned, they've had some close calls recently.
Yeah, coming across the state, I think they're going to pull back the offense a little bit because they know how tough and physical this Watertown defense is. They're going to try to move the ball on the ground if they can. If they can't, that's where it could get out of hand, I think, if Watertown creates a few turnovers on defense. But if Spearfish makes a couple big plays in the games that they've won, they've made big plays. If they can break a couple down the field, Spearfish can play with them.
And then number 4 T, again, T goes from receiving votes all the way to number 4 after their shutout over Mitchell. They are at Brookings. After that opening loss to Spearfish, and it was a 10-point loss, but remember, they gave up a huge 99-yard pass play late in the 4th quarter to make that game seem a little further out of reach than it really was. I'm impressed that T has turned it around.
They have turned it around, and they've done it without Brenner Conrad at quarterback. And, of course, it helps that they've played Mitchell and Douglas over the last couple of weeks. Now their first real test without Brenner Conrad at quarterback. We're going to see if they can run the ball against a team that is absolutely stout against the run. There may be 1 touchdown in this game, maybe 2.
We're going to find
maybe
out.
2. But
just find where Tetzloff is on the field and try to run away from him.
We are going to have a low-scoring game, folks. Eat your heart out, Iowa. I think the over-under is going to be pretty low.
Shout out our friend Austin Bramley for the Iowa reference.
That's right.
But hey, I'll give the Hawkeyes credit. They're a little more offensive this year.
Yeah,
this is past Iowa. Punts galore.
They're killing it.
A loaded week in 11AA. Now down to 11A, and of course the big story of the week was the West Central victory over Canton, 48-14. We already went over that. Sioux Falls Christian, 42-0. This is a common theme. Number 1 teams doing what they need to do and taking care of business.
They established the run game with Braden Whitty. He, I think, punched in 3 or 4 touchdowns in that game. They took the ball away from Madison. They never let him in that game. And you're right. If you're the number 1 team, that's what you have to do. And remember, Madison came into this game as a 3-1 team, and they absolutely shut the door on them. Sioux Falls Christian definitely deserves to be that number 1 team in this poll.
And then Lennox over Dakota Valley, 48-19. Again, kind of proving your point. Lennox, when their offense is rolling, there are very few teams that can stop them. We've already seen them play Sioux Falls Christian this year. That was a 19-8 game. They just couldn't get that offense going in the second half against the Chargers, but pretty much every other half they've gotten the offense going.
And they've been so balanced in this Dakota Valley game. It was a textbook way that they want to run the offense. When Sean Flanagan has this 3 or 4 different receivers making catches, Tate Gertis getting yards on the ground, Boston Cats are able to throw and run the ball. Just that's what you want to see from this Lennox team. When they play like that, they can play with anybody in the class.
And then just a quick note on this poll that you're seeing. This is actually last week's poll. West Central has moved up. They're number 5. Del Rapids has moved to number 3, and Dakota Valley's at 4. No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that people know that we know, because Canton falls from number 3 all the way out of the top 5. They're still receiving votes, but for Canton, how did the Seahawks turn things around? We've talked about their injuries, but how did they turn things around?
Yeah, it's going to really help getting Granum back if they get some type of balance in the backfield. When right now you can just sit there and key on Kane Wallner, and it's really hard to do for Canton. So again, they've made big plays this year. When they played Vermilion, they were able to throw the ball down the field. If they get back to a little bit more balance on offense, I think they can play. But it's really going to take T. Granum coming back to make them a full team.
Del Rapids over Tri-Valley, 44-6. That was Del Rapids, then at the time number 5 over a team in Tri-Valley that was receiving votes. And then a team you thought was going to be on the rise, Rapid City Christian. They get a nice win over Hot Springs, 45-7. Looking a little bit closer at Sioux Falls Christian. Undefeated 5-0. They get the shutout victory over Madison. They're at Vermilion this week, but you knew from mid-August that this was the best team in 11A. Why is that?
Actually, I remember watching them. We did the game last year against Dakota Valley.
Yep, in the playoffs for Midco.
And they had so much depth. Even after injuries, you'd see them bring juniors and sophomores up and really open some eyes. So when they had 10 starters back coming this year, I knew they were going to be solid, and I knew they had star power with Cole Snyder and Lincoln Prinz and Jacob Congdon on defense and Lincoln Semchenko on the line and Braden Whitty at running back and on and on. They've got so many good players. But that second point on the screen right there, offensive line averages 260 pounds, including Lincoln Semchenko, the SDSU commit. That's where they separate themselves from the rest of the field. That's what makes them so good.
Absolutely. And I remember when we talked about Brandon Valley last year and their big offensive line, for an 11A offensive line to average 260 is really impressive.
It is, and these guys can move a little bit too. Of course, Semchenko's probably close to 300, if not over 300, but they've got other guys up there, all returning starters. They got a transfer in from Beersford who came in and was able to play center right away. A lot of good guys who can move the ball, and you could see it. Braden Whitty had his choice of holes to pick from last week when I watched him. It's a really well-oiled machine right now for Sioux Falls Christian.
And they're just so balanced on both sides of the ball. Just the list of playmakers on both sides. A lot of these kids play both ways. Everyone knows about Cole Snyder. We know about Prince, the quarterback. You mentioned other guys. It's just amazing to see the depth of the talent they have.
Yeah, Paul Hookman has had a tremendous year on the defensive side. Pixler has been one of their top tacklers on defense this year, but also comes in and plays some offense. But defensively, they got so many guys that they can just continue to bring in, and they're fresh. They do play guys both ways, but they sub in a lot of guys too. So they can get a lot of players in and out. Canyon Prinz, and another guy who can play offense, but has played so well on defense this year. Just a lot of playmakers on both sides of the ball for this team.
They are at Vermilion this week, so we'll see Sioux Falls Christian on that Dakota Dome turf. Then we got the Black and Blue Bowl, Lennox and Canton. A good test for both sides. It's in Canton. We remember Lennox and their offense, but for Canton, they need a bounce back in the worst way.
They need it, and Lennox is a team, if you get them off their rhythm, you can create some turnovers on this team. That's going to be the key for Canton, is they got to find a way to win the turnover battle in this game and then keep it on the ground to slow this game down. But Lennox they've played like a number 2 team. They're the better team in this game.
Beersford's at Dakota Valley. Tri-Valley and Madison should be an interesting matchup. And then we have a championship rematch between now number 3 Del Rapids and number 5 West Central. These teams are obviously very different than what they were last season when they met at the Dakota Dome, but both of them on the rise right now.
Both of them on the rise. Both are very similar, where they have one stud running back, but they have 4 or 5 different guys that they can hand the ball off to and have a lot of confidence. Both are run heavy, run first. Del Rapids is able to throw the ball, though, from time to time. You look at Del Rapids early in the season, they really struggled to get some rhythm going with the new quarterback, with the new offensive line, but they have improved so much. Derek Genslinger, their head coach, told me the improvement they've made from week 1 and 2 till now is dramatic. So he thinks that they're playing their best ball right now, and it's got to be because Rusink in the backfield. He has not only caught touchdowns, run touchdowns in, he's got 3 different return touchdowns, a kick return, a punt return, and a defensive return for a touchdown. He is the single most dynamic player right now in 11A in Cole Rusink, and he's got the full attention of West Central. That's what one thing their head coach, Barry Matthias, said is if you can find a way to keep an eye on number 21 there, I think it's number 21, we've got a chance. But it's going to take all of our guys to make sure he doesn't make a big play. And he said he's been watching film. He thinks he has 3 or 4 more return touchdowns that were called back because of penalty. So anytime Rusink gets the ball, it's going to be all hands on deck for West Central to try to stop that. But West Central, they've done well. They don't throw the ball much at all this year, but Aiden
They got
Bartman,
a stevy of backs, including Barton.
Bartman's been the main guy, but
Yep.
you're right. 3 or 4 or 5 different guys. Defensively, they've been really stout this year, and they showed that, especially in the second half against Canton, and really shutting them down.
Quick note from Marcy in the comments: Colton Steen is the transfer from Beersford.
There you go.
So we thank our viewers for making sure we remember all the names properly, or as best we can. So thank you, Marcy, for pointing that out. But again, the big matchups: the Black and Blue Bowl, Lennox and Canton, and then Del Rapids and West Central in an 11A title rematch. Moving on down, 11B, and when you look at 11B. Again, the top 5 teams did what they needed to do. They all won last week. No change in the top 5 poll. Winner over Miller Highmore Herald, 58-7. Sioux Valley over Dual in particular, 48-14. You mentioned the play of Donovan Rose earlier.
Yeah, he looked like he was ready to come back, and he has been so good. But he's not the focal point. He's not the only guy. But they're still undefeated, folks. They got 1 vote at number 1, so I guess we got to keep an eye on the Cossacks.
Absolutely, we do. Elk Point over Beersford, 39-0. Woonsocket, Wessington Springs, Sanborn Central over Wagner, 29-13. Wagner team kind of hovering in that receiving votes top 5 area. And then Mount Vernon Plankton stays put with a big win over Chamberlain, 53-14. Again, the top 5 goes unchanged. Any other things that you learned in particular from 11B last week?
It's the same story for me. I think we see Winter dominating week in, week out. We kind of ask ourselves, is there any weaknesses that any of these teams can maybe take advantage of? And we're going to find out with MVP if maybe, they feel like a top 5 team, but how are they going to square up against Winter this week? That'll be interesting. And then to see Woonsocket, Wessington Springs, Sanborn Central get a definitive win against Wagner was comforting for them and for me to know that they do belong in that conversation in the top 5.
Absolutely they do. But let's go back to that one team who's still receiving a first place vote, and that's the subject of our closer look in 11B, Sioux Valley. Sioux Valley has been a team that over the past couple of years has really established itself as a high-powered offensive team, and then their defense has also come through in a lot of clutch situations. They're neck and neck. They're still undefeated against Winter, but why are the Cossacks continuously, at least for the past couple of years, been so great?
Yeah, well, last year they got out to that 9-0 start and then lost in the playoffs. A really disappointing year for the Cossacks, who had some real firepower on that team, but a lot of those guys are back this year and are focused, off to another great start this year. But they are the highest scoring team. Yes, they haven't played the toughest schedule, but they're the highest scoring team not only in the class, in all of 11-man football. They're averaging almost 48 points per game. That's not been the issue. And they've only given up a few multi-touchdown games, and some of that was garbage time this year too. So we'll see. We'll see where that goes. But Donovan Rose has been excellent running the football this year, 573 yards rushing. We saw that kick return this week. He's definitely one of the guys that you have to watch, but there's so many guys on this team that can get it done, including Brock Christopherson at quarterback, who's been a huge addition at quarterback to be able to steady that position for Sioux Valley.
And it's almost like their defense is maybe a little underrated just because of how high-powered the offense is.
Exactly. And some of those scores are skewed a little bit because they are giving up second half points. I think they're really tough on the defensive side. And Coach Dan Hughes said this is one of the most humble, hungry, focused teams that he's had in a long time. So when he says that, and he's had a lot of good, focused, hungry teams, that's saying something to me that he really likes the makeup of this team.
And as you said, they haven't really played anyone as far as a ranked team. But again, you can only play the guys on your schedule. So, it's not their fault. But also, they haven't really had a close game. You take opponents who you're supposed to beat, and you beat them.
That's what he did. And he also gives some credit. We were talking about defense a little bit to his defensive coach, Jordan Fast. And he's got these guys playing hungry on that defensive side of the ball. So as well as they're doing on offense, he really likes the defense as well. And coming up, they've got a little tougher stretch here coming up with Flandreau, Beersford, EPJ being the game that will really give them a test. But those other two games are not walkovers either.
Absolutely not. As you mentioned, Sioux Valley is at Flandreau this week. Elk Point Jefferson is at Wagner. Woonsocket Weston Springs Sanborn Central hosting Miller Highmore Herald. And then Mount Vernon Plankinton is against number one winner. That's probably our big game in 11B, 1 versus 5. We've mentioned this Mount Vernon Plankinton team as a team that was on the rise, deserving to be kind of in that bottom of the poll area. Now they get their biggest test of the year. And for winner, I think it'll be an interesting challenge just because they faced other lower ranked teams as well and taken care of business. Will they do the same against MVP?
These two teams play very similarly. It's going to be a physical battle up in the trenches. If somebody's going to beat winner, we've seen a couple of teams able to pass the ball on them. APJ a little bit was able to pass. Woonsocket Weston Spring a little bit able to move the ball through the pass. I wonder if that's on Coach Olson's mind for MVP. Maybe to let Isaiah Olson throw the ball a little bit and maybe try to make some plays down the field. Everybody's going to try it. I don't know. We'll see if they can. I think they stay within a couple of scores in this game.
And remember, this is a winner team that is still banged up and still doing a lot of great things, staying undefeated at 5-0. But number one winner against number 5 Mount Vernon Plankinton, certainly the game to watch in 11B. To the 9-man ranks. 9AA. And again, we mentioned there were not a lot of great matchups across 9-man last week. We'll be completely honest. The top 5 teams all won. Elkton Lake Benton was off last week, but the closest game by my count was the Parkston over Bonham by 42 points, 48-6. Hamlin over Redfield, 59-0. Viborg Hurley over Garrettson, 50-0. TDA ACDC over Burke, 66-7. Not a lot to glean from 9AA last week.
No, you couldn't learn a lot off of that game or off of those games last week. But as we all know, what do we still have? 5 undefeated teams in this class, including 4 of them being ranked. So we haven't seen them play against each other, much like we were talking about in 11 AAA, where the top teams haven't played each other yet. I still think Hamlin is cruising to be the team to beat, but Parkston week in, week out is showing that they have a nice, comfortable spot there at number 1, and I don't think a lot of people will argue with them at number 1 right now.
No, it's one of those deals where I agree. I think Hamlin, with the points that Hamlin is putting up, they're 6-0. They haven't had their bye week yet. But Parkston being undefeated and the defending champions, it's kind of like, well, until you lose, you're kind of, at least for me, you're kind of there already. But I mean, if they play Hamlin in the championship game, that's obviously going to be a whale of a matchup. But of course, we have a long way to go, as you said. There's still 5 undefeated teams in 9AA. We know about Parkston. We know about Hamlin. We know about Elkton Lake Benton. Your closer look is to our favorite acronym, Trip Delmont Armor, Andy Central, Dakota Christian, TDA, ACDC.
So 4 different schools, 5 communities or more, actually, counting Dakota Christian, who has people from all over the place. But they play at 3 different home fields with these 4 different schools. They are putting up points in bunches this year, 49.4 points per game. Defensively, because they've scored so many, they've given up a couple, but only 13.4 per game. And this is a team that over the years we've seen improve each and every season. Last year, they finally put a team together that got to 500, and this year they're blowing that away. And they're playing really well with a strong senior class. But it's hard to put co-ops together. You don't see co-ops with 3 or 4 different schools that do well very often because it's really hard to build chemistry. That's something the Thunderhawks have been able to do so far.
You mentioned the improvement. They were 2-6 in 2021, 3-5 in 2022, 500, 4-4 last year, and 5-0 this year. So the steady, gradual improvement. And as you said, co-ops are difficult as is. When you combine 3-4 schools, it's a remarkable job by them to not only be undefeated, but just to stay in the conversation here in 9AA.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the ADMs, the average daily membership of these schools. Trip Delmont, 23 kids. Armor is the biggest one at 38. Andy Central, 34. Dakota Christian at 20. There's not a lot of kids going to these schools, but they're finding a way to make enough players out there do a good job for the Thunderhawks.
And they have a very interesting matchup this week. They are hosting number 1 in 9B, Avon. That's going to be a very intriguing matchup.
Yeah, Avon is a team that hasn't seen a lot of tests so far this year. This is going to be a legitimate test. They are a 4-team school. They are a bigger school than Avon for sure, but we'll see. I think Avon's the favorites in this one. TDA, ACDC could really do some damage to their season if they can give them a game, or let alone maybe possibly pull one out.
The top 3 teams in 9AA are all on the road. Parkston is at 9A Platte. Geddes Hamlin is at DeSmet. Elton Lake Benton is at Garrettson. And then Viborg Hurley is hosting Chester out of 9A. Speaking of which, we'll move down to 9A. Got to make sure the wheel is correct, of course. Howard was off last week. Wall all over Stanley County, 41-6. That was kind of the game you were at least intrigued by. Stanley County being a 9AA school, but Wall had no issues.
Yeah, and Wall had that tough early season schedule, and it's kind of going easier as we get down through the rest of the year. So that was maybe their last tough test.
Absolutely. Warner over Northwestern, 56-6. Woolsey Westington over Gregory, 52-12. And we mentioned Harding County Bison over Timberlake, 44-12. Again, nothing too outlandish, nothing too outrageous. Phillip over Jones County, 34-0. Phillip is still receiving votes in the 9A poll. But we just talked about it. Let's get a closer look at Wall and why they've continued to be a factor here in this class.
Well, this is a team that has a sophomore quarterback, but is still scoring 46 points per game. Yes, their schedule is a little bit easier than some other teams in 9A, but they're leaving no doubts. And Tanner Vollmer, the sophomore quarterback we were talking about, has been a dual threat quarterback. You see it there, 500 yards passing, 486 yards rushing. And then defensively, Jace Blasius, one of those guys who is just taking over if you look at his stats. And I tell you what, I think Wall is really in a good place because they're going to be undefeated. They're going to get a high seed. They're going to make people come all the way out to Wall to play throughout the playoffs. And they are a team kind of like TDA, ACDC, that 5-6 years ago was moving up the ranks, and now they're plateauing right as an elite team in 9A.
And speaking of elite, they're a big play team. They're averaging nearly 10 yards a carry, 16 yards per reception. I mean, that's unbelievable.
And they're able to do both. Like, not many 9-man teams are able to spread it around like that. They can, with a young quarterback, a lot of different playmakers. Gotta love what Lex Heathershaw is doing with Wall. They are definitely a team that Howard's got to be aware of. And the way it's setting up right now, they're probably not going to see each other until the Dome,
right,
if they both make it that far. But that is one I know that Lex Heathershaw wants to go get because he's determined that he's got a good team this year.
And then as you saw on the graphic, and as you mentioned a bit ago, they've given Phillip and Harding County Bison their only losses so far of the season. As far as games to watch, Wall is at Jones County, Redfield's at number 3 Warner, Bonham's at number 4 Woolsey Westington, Dupree at number 5 Harding County Bison. Howard, back off a bye week, is hosting 9AA Hanson. That's another intriguing cross-class matchup.
Yeah, and Hanson has had one of the toughest schedules in all of 9-man football. Got beat up a little bit early losses-wise, but they're a good team. So Howard gets a nice test this week from Hanson. A game they should win, but Hanson's got some speed and some ability to match up with them physically. So this is definitely one that they have to get their ears up for.
Hanson and Howard, 9AA at number 1 team in 9A. Last class, 9B, and we discussed it with Avon already. Avon was off last week, and they get TDA ACDC 9B facing 9AA this week. Del Rapids St. Mary's with the shutout win over Iroquois Lake Preston. Canastota over Sioux Falls Lutheran, the number 5 team. Canastota 50-14. And then we talked about it a bit earlier, Faulkton and Sully Buttes 28-8. Just a good solid win for Faulkton and proving themselves that they are going to be in contention again in 9B.
I think they're really happy that they got to play Leola Frederick and they got to play Warner at the time that they did when they're trying to improve. It pointed out some things that they've got to work on. Shane Geddes really likes the upside of this Faulkton team, and they should be able to ride a crest into the playoffs.
And we talked about Del Rapids St. Mary's last week because they actually gave up a bunch of points having to win that 46-44 shootout against Centerville. They bounced back this week, a shutout victory 50-0 over Iroquois Lake Preston. So let's take a closer look at DRSM.
Yeah, this is the team right now, number 1 in seed points in 9B. I know Avon is the overwhelming number 1 team, but they actually are 6-0. They had a couple of injuries, which they're hoping to get everybody back after the bye week that they are going to have this week, but only giving up 8.3 points per game, including that 40-point outburst that they gave up to Centerville. So they're doing pretty well other than that game.
Absolutely. And then you look at the balance of the class, 10 sophomores out of the 18 on the roster.
Yeah, first of all, 18 on the roster. That's a pretty small school.
That's a small class.
And they are used to having small classes, but they're getting contributions. And when I talked to Ross Flemmer this week, he said that almost all these 18 guys are giving some type of contribution on the team, and that is something you don't see very often, especially in a 9-man school where everybody is bringing something to the table. But 10 sophomores, 2 juniors who have been clutch for them, Tremere, I got to go back and look at my...
Tremere
Hansen and Lincoln LeBrun, the quarterback-running back combination have been outstanding. Both those guys juniors. So as this team continues to show what they can do, and they've beaten teams over 500 all year long, I think they're going to build confidence and be maybe the team to beat next year, but they're doing it a year early.
Absolutely. And of course it's perfectly fitting that the Cardinal is kind of looking at your right shoulder there. Got the helmet right there. See, there's a reason we put these helmets out here.
Strategic.
Absolutely strategic. But as you mentioned, DRSM, they are off this week. Cannasota's off this week. The Avon TDA ACDC is kind of the big matchup as far as a 9B school is concerned.
Yeah, and Avon has pretty much rolled this year. They haven't had to throw the ball. I wonder if they're maybe going to try to throw the ball a few times against TDA ACDC, but they haven't had to yet.
How many completions does Avon have this season?
One completion.
They have one completed pass this season.
1 for 3, but they play a lot of half games. They get it over with by halftime. Isaiah Meyer has been awesome. 743 yards.
Yeah, when
rushing,
he's running, you don't really need to pass.
12.5 yards per carry. 3 return touchdowns for him. But how about his brother Al-Shaman Gunter? 48 tackles so far to lead the team. 4 sacks, 6 tackles for loss, and a fumble recovery. I think if we had an offensive and defensive player of the year in 9-man football, those two in the same household might be able to get those awards. They have been that good.
Absolutely. Avon's just been dominant on both sides of the football. We will see how they do against a 9AA team this week as they face TDA ACDC. All right. We've gone through the classes. It's time to ask Jandy anything. Another great week of questions. We have our usual cavalcade. When it's all said and done, Richard Winter asks, who's going to win 11AA? That's a tough one.
Yeah, we don't know enough yet.
I mean, it's easy to say Watertown right now just because they've been the most consistent team. I'm kind of in your area. I might think T is sneaky.
T's sneaky. I don't know how they'll do. How they'll be able to do without
Conrad. Yeah,
and that's huge because with him they were really building. And then last 2 weeks they haven't had as much competition. Brookings, if they could just play defense only, they would have a shot at winning this thing. But they have to play offense against 11 AA teams and have not been able to produce offensively. Watertown has issues with penalties. Pierre has had issues offensively throughout the year, and they're going to get better throughout the year, you would think. But to me, if I had to pick one team right now, I think Yankton has enough firepower and enough good coaching, good depth on the defensive side that I saw them play Watertown and they got beat on the scoreboard, but they felt like they belonged on the same field. I think Watertown and Yankton seem like the 2 best teams to me.
For sure. And off of that, Matt Kearney, our good friend out west, asks, right now Pierre's the 7th seed in the 11 AA standings. Mitchell is 8, Huron 9, Sturgis 10. Is there any possibility Pierre doesn't even make the playoffs? I'm going to say no. I think they'll be in. I think they can recover toward the end of the season. But the fact that the question is even being asked, and it's a legitimate question, is just unreal.
So O'Gorman this week. That doesn't count toward the playoffs, but that's a big game for them. And then Spearfish, Sturgis, and then Douglas. They should be able to beat Douglas. But Spearfish, Sturgis... that's not what it used to be for Pierre. Those are going to be good games for those two, and they've got to win those 2 games, in my mind, to be able to find a spot in the playoffs. And those are huge games for them coming up after this week at O'Gorman.
Yeah, so at Sturgis after the OG week, then they're home for Spearfish and at Douglas. The home game versus Spearfish may determine a lot.
You bet it is. That's going to be the one I think that maybe they could possibly fall out of the top 8. I still don't think they will. I can't say that.
We have our good buddies Ryan Deal and Chad Berger with some fantastic questions. The best venue for high school state championships in South Dakota, because I'll be a company man, I will of course say the Barnett Center and Walks Arena, Boys B. Why would you want to go anywhere else, Jandy?
Why would you? I don't know. I mean, this is a personal question.
It is.
This is for
I will say, I know it's not high school, but Northern State, when they host I Hate Winter basketball at the Barnett Center, that's one of the best atmospheres, period, anywhere.
People make the atmosphere to me that it's not necessarily the place as much, but you can't argue the Pentagon has been an awesome place to host state championships too. It's just the perfect size
Absolutely.
for girls basketball. So that's been awesome too. But to me, it's the Dakota Dome. I mean, you go to the Dakota Dome and it means one thing. I mean, all season
State
long, people are
championships,
talking about let's get to the dome. Like, you don't say let's get to the Pentagon or let's get to Walks Arena. They say let's get to the dome.
Let's get to the dome. Garrett Kniebel, who are some of your favorite high school athletes you've interviewed over the last couple years?
Oh, yeah. Well,
that's a good one.
That is a good one. I loved interviewing Mikey Daniel years ago.
Oh, yeah, he was fun.
And ended up going to SDSU and then played a little bit in the XFL.
And a little in the NFL,
and
too.
a little bit in the NFL, too. But he was great because he was so focused, I remember, as a high schooler. He knew his goals. He made sure the rest of his team was up to his par, and he got the team to the championship game a couple times. So he was excellent. So many good ones, though. Lincoln Kienholz was interesting. He's not a super engaging guy to talk to, but he will just casually throw out things like, yeah, and Ryan Grubb came and flew and watched me throw the ball into a 40-mile-an-hour wind. And
that's right.
And, I got a D1 offer right after. Like, just the way he would say stuff like that, and you're like, wait a second.
Slow
Ryan
down
Grubb
here.
flew to Pier and watched you throw the ball into a 40-mile-an-hour wind and knew he was going to get an offer at that point. So, stuff like that. Like, I love, Nash. I got to go interview him and see him do a workout in his high school gym at 6 a.m, and some of the crazy stuff he was doing as a junior and a senior, and then being able to talk to him about it afterwards. So just so many great ones. Those come to the top of my head, but there's been many more.
Yeah, I enjoyed talking to kids on the Jefferson team that went undefeated a couple years ago. Taylor Ashley, Griffin Wilde. I thought they were really engaging.
Griffin got better. Like, he did not want to talk.
He loosened up.
And then he loosened up throughout the year. Yep. And now you watch him at SDSU, and, we got him primed for talking to the media.
Best high school officiating crew in the state, Chad Berger. Oh, my goodness. I'll be honest, I don't know a lot of high school officials. I will say just for fun, because I know he's a favorite of the NSIC, Doug Vitava for a basketball referee. I know that'll get some. I think
Jim Brickens Jr., every time he's on there, it's a big game. I don't know. There's a lot of good ones.
Absolutely. Can Sioux Falls Christian play with any 11 AA teams?
Yeah, I think they definitely could, because they have the line, and because they've got power on the outside. Yeah, they when you watch them, they feel like an 11 AA type of team. Would they win 11 AA? That might be a stretch, but they can definitely play with them.
This one obviously aimed at Chad Berger from Ryan Deal. Favorite holiday, Christmas or Taco Tuesday at Taco Bell specifically? We gotta say Taco.
Leave
that alone. The potato ole among Taco Bell and Taco John's, I can unequivocally say the potato olays at Taco John's are the best individual food item between the two restaurants.
Okay, so I just started full time at 605.
Congrats, by the way. Yes,
which is great, but I'm just going to send an invoice to Taco John's for advertising this segment right here, because we talk about them every week.
We could thank Chad for that. Chad,
sending the invoice right to you, just so you know what you're getting.
Chad, send us some Atomic Wings questions next time, because that's also pretty good. Our good friend Matt Whitwick, he covers Division II in the NSIC, the best 11 AAA champ in the last decade. That's a tough one.
Yeah, I got in trouble for leaving out the 21 Harrisburg Tigers the last time I did this conversation. Because Jacob Knuth got on me a little bit after that, because they were really good. But the most dominating team was that Jefferson team.
I agree.
By far, just from start to finish, there was no game where you thought they were going to be challenged. And there were a couple games that a team played with them, but yeah, the Ashley Wilde team was unbelievable. And
Nelson Wright at running back.
Wright at running back. The offensive line was big. Yeah. Guys, Thomas Heiberger was younger, but he was
Dawson Sexer.
They had a lot of studs on that team, and for them only being a 2-year-old high school at the time, that even adds another layer to the amazing year that they had.
All right, and we will end with Mr. Burger, favorite Halloween candy since we are officially in October.
We could have saved this one for a couple weeks.
We could have, but I figured we start with brownie points, we end with Halloween candy.
Okay, so
it's sweet to sweet.
Our household is a peanut-free household because
my brother's allergic to peanuts, so there you go.
Because my son. So otherwise, yeah, it would be pretty tough to defend off the peanut butter cup.
Yep.
But so I just go to Twix.
Twix is solid. Again, I think absent allergies, I think peanut butter cups are number one. Now, do you want the regular peanut butter cups or the pumpkin shaped ones?
You tell me, man. I don't get to have them.
You mean like you didn't like go to work, sneak a peanut butter cup, and then like chew some
Brush
gum
my teeth
afterwards or something?
Yeah,
like
you're
that?
right. I did.
Okay.
Don't tell my wife.
Peanut butter cups are fantastic. Don't tell your wife; she's upstairs. But
Yeah,
anyway.
exactly. Exactly.
Spoiler alert: we're filming.
All right, I had one peanut butter cup. No.
Peanut butter cups are amazing. All the shapes are awesome. So if you get the trees at Christmas or the pumpkins at Halloween, and number one is the eggs. The peanut butter eggs at Easter are the best from Reese's. But as far as Halloween is concerned, Kit Kat for me. Just crispy, chocolatey. Can't beat a Kit Kat.
All right.
Give me a break, Jandy.
Give me a couple weeks to rebut that one.
All righty. Another fantastic episode. Thank you again for all your questions. We are halfway through our inaugural season here on Inside the 605 and halfway through the South Dakota high school football season. We are coming down the home stretch, Jandy.
Let's go. I can't wait. These next few weeks, we're going to learn so much. And I'll be out at West Central watching Del Rapids West Central, and then I'm going to try to hit the second half of the Lincoln-Brandon Valley game. So, again, if you're out there, say hi.
Absolutely. Thank you to everyone. Bruce Andera, Hannah Rowe, our producers. For Jason Andera, I'm David Brown. Thanks for watching. This has been Inside the 605 from 605 Sports and Live Ticket TV. We will see you next week.